Strategies to minimize IP costs while maximizing IP value. Hello, and welcome back to Invent Anything. In this episode, we're going to cover a number of things. You'll learn about the hidden costs and missed opportunities that startups face when managing their intellectual property. We'll also then explore strategies to save on IP expenses, including cost-effective patent strategy filings, leveraging trade secrets, as well as how to maximize the value by aligning the IP with the business goals and then targeting non-core markets for licensing. So we're going to talk about it an awful lot. This is John Cronin, Invent Anything.
Inventions keep the world spinning. From fire and the wheel to today's high tech, inventions power change. Turn your inventions into reality. Learn how to get your ideas to market. This is Invent Anything with John Cronin.
So today we're going to cover 6 topics. The first topic is, what I have found in my many experiences over 26 years with startup companies, working for several thousand companies, I believe, over those years, many of them early stage companies. Then in topic number 2, we're going to talk about what are the costs of IP. But we're also going to talk in that topic about the opportunity costs and the hard costs. Then we're going to jump into topic number 3, which is actual strategies to save costs. And we're going to repeat that and have even more strategies in topic number 4 to save cost. Then we're going to switch over to topic number 5, because while reducing costs, what we also want to do is to maximize value. You've heard that there's no free lunch, but by reducing costs, you have to give up something. But I don't think you have to give up that much, or you might even gain something by being a little bit more shrewd. So how do we gain strategy to maximize the value? And then finally, topic number 6, we'll look at considerations for justifying IP work in general. So, and then we'll just wrap up. Now, we've always considered different audiences, and this audience, I think, for this podcast would be primarily for those executives dealing with decisions about funding their IP efforts. I think also for those small companies who want to justify their IP costs, this is certainly for you. A lot of CEOs and CFOs want to maximize their value. So for audiences that want to get an ROI for their IP strategy, this is definitely for you. I work a lot with investors and board members. So this is a great podcast that could give you insight as to where the costs are and how to reduce them and how to guide, your companies. Specifically, this is for CFOs struggling how to manage cash in an early stage company. This is definitely for you because the CEO may want to develop IP, but you may want to reduce the costs, and there can be conflict there. And then finally, as an audience, I think for those who want some tips and tricks on how to reduce costs and also how to maximize value. So this is John Cronin, Invent Anything. And coming up, we're going to discuss the hidden costs of intellectual property, including patent fees, legal resources, the loss of revenue to copycats. But we'll also explore opportunity costs for things like the loss of sales margin, brand protection loss. And then we'll talk about the hard costs of the executive time and patent development and legal fees. So stay tuned. So topic number 1, the background, what I have found. Well, as I mentioned earlier, I have a lot of experience with startups in the last 26 years or so, working for hundreds and hundreds of them, and in many different technologies. And these are startups sort of all over the world, actually, that we work with. And so I've learned a lot about the way CEOs, the boards, CFOs, the entrepreneurs think about IP and IP costs. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't have 1 or 2 business development calls with early stage companies, executives or investors, always asking about, should I invest in IP and what should I do when I decide to do that? So I have a lot of background. As a matter of fact, I'm a practicing inventor myself, and I have almost several thousand patents and applications worldwide. So I deal with patent costs a lot for my clients. What I found is one of the first things, and you might be surprised, but generally, most companies don't calculate the many aspects of the IP costs, good or bad. They might get their patent to find out that then they have to pay maintenance fees. They may file their patent to find out that, they have to pay fees for office actions. they may start in the development of IP to find out, boy, it's sucking up a lot of my people's time. So there's a lot of issues there. But they may also totally miss the fact that if they have patents, they can do things that would leverage their company. And may miss that. They may only be thinking about the cost side, not the opportunity. So I found that really companies don't do a good job of really calculating many aspects. And so this is a podcast directly to help that. Another thing I found is there are hidden patent costs that you might not know about. You might find out that, you have more office actions than you were hoping. And every time you have an office action, you pay the attorneys. And then there are maintenance fees. There are fees for continuing examinations. There are continuation of patents. There are continuations in part. So there's many other things that have to do with your patent filing in other countries, transcription fees and all that stuff. So there's a lot of costs that if you think you're just getting the patent and that's it, well, you may be very surprised about all the other fees. And so you could add it all up and say how much it is. Well, it really depends upon what you're doing. If you don't have continuations, you don't do foreign filing, it may be bare costs, but once you get into it, you may decide you want to file in multiple countries and all the rest and file continuations. And now you have a continual bill for IP. Another thing I found is that there's also sort of hidden business costs in terms of things like when things get legal, then you have to respond to legal problems associated with your patents. If you decide you want to litigate, for instance, that's an enormous expense. Or if you decide, for instance, that you don't file patents and then you get copycats and you have nothing to assert against them, that's a hidden cost because IP helps you reduce copycats. I've also found that good advice is probably rare. I mean, the normal combination is the early stage company and the inventors are talking to patent attorneys, and certainly that's a really good combination. I'm not saying anything wrong with that. But many times that combination is kind of limited because maybe you don't have some overall advice. And I almost can kind of use a metaphor when people get older, they take more prescription drugs and they'll go to their eye doctor and take a prescription and they'll go to, the cardiologist and there's a prescription and they might go to their general doctor and get a prescription. And what happens is you have 2 or 3, 4 prescriptions and who's really looking out for the overall health, of these multiple prescriptions. And a lot of times you might think that it's your family doctor, but sometimes they really don't have all that skill to associate all that. And so it's kind of like that. There's a patent attorney and the inventor and the CEO, et cetera. But having this overall linkage to business advice for monetization and for value isn't there. And another thing I found is that most companies don't understand the various IP types. They want to get a patent on the method when maybe they should have got a patent on the apparatus, or they could have got a functional claim or some combination of patent types and claims. So the lack of understanding of the type of IP you could get is another thing that reduces value or maybe increases cost because you file, a case in one direction, recognizing you really should have done it in another direction. Now, who would be the person that should help you decide that? Once again, good strategic advice on how to type IP with your business strategy is really important. One of the kooky things, even in today's world, is there's no value calculator. There's no place to get online that we found that you could type in all the things you're trying to do and ask the question, how much is this going to cost? That's today. I hope that's going to change in the future. We'll talk about that at the end of this podcast. What I've also found, and this might also be a surprise, is that the CFO and CEOs really don't have this background of sizing the costs and the risks and so on regarding IP. Very rarely. Many times it's their first time. So it's kind of like, as another metaphor, maybe you're buying your first car. Get excited about what it is. You're going to get one. And then all of a sudden you find out that, you have to change the oil. Oh, that's a cost. And change tires. And then all of a sudden you break down and then you find out you should have had AAA and all those things that happen when you buy a car. So if it's your first time, there's a lot of that stuff going on. Once again, good advice would be really important on the front end of this. One of the things, and I guarantee it doesn't matter whether it's a big company, small company, you name it, 95% or more of the companies I work with, and this is thousands, okay, not including the many thousands of business development calls I've had, very few companies have an IP strategy, a clear IP strategy, like no one, basically. It's very rare. And when I see it, I almost want to clap. If you don't have a very clear IP strategy, and now you're going to get patents, I'm sure I can have a whole metaphor for that in any kind of field. But maybe you decide you want to lose weight and you're going to go on the keto diet, which maybe that's the wrong overall thing. Maybe you just need more exercise. And so there's this idea of not having a clear strategy of what you want to do. And then another sort of background I found is that there almost is equally no monetization experience, none, in terms of how to get money out of IP. So look, that's background. I could continue and continue and continue. And I could tell you this was the reason why my practice does really well over 25, 26 years, is that we have over 50 different services that help in a lot of these things. And so I don't want to make this a sales pitch, but it turns out that there's a lot of experiences at early stage companies when they're developing their own IP, start to get into the costs and get into the monetization, and they have to kind of feel along the way. And so hopefully this podcast can help you start to think about some of this and put you better on the way. Now let's jump into topic number 2, which I talked about. What are the costs? What are the opportunity costs and what are the hard costs? Well, let's talk about opportunity costs, really opportunity loss, right? If you really understood how a good IP position with the right numbers of patents and trade secrets could enhance your M&A value. Usually companies, when they get sold or get acquired, it's 2-3x revenue. You can find drivers that intellectual property gives can get you 10x, 20x, 50x, even 100x revenue. So if you don't know that, you can easily find it out by looking up articles in PitchBook or been talking to companies like mine, but there's a high degree of ROI for it. So you might lose that opportunity cost. Another opportunity cost is the inability of you to counter assert in a patent lawsuit if you don't have patents. So you may get sued for patent infringement against a company that has products. Well, if you don't have patents on your products and other extensions, you can't counter sue. So that's an opportunity cost, and it's a big one. Another opportunity cost is losing trade secrets. So if you don't have a good trade secret program, you're going to lose trade secrets, and that could tank your company. Another opportunity cost is brand. Competitors are out there maybe saying they have the patents on the space and you don't. So your brand gets hurt as not being an innovator. Let's switch over to some of the hard costs. I mean, there are a lot of opportunity costs, a lot of things missed, but let's talk about the hard costs. Get involved in an IP, direction in the company. The CEO and executive is going to start spending time. Their time is very valuable. So how do you account for that? And you should start thinking about that if you're going to get involved in IP. Another thing is the patent development costs internally, monitoring and invoicing and writing up the disclosure and having engineers opine on things and answering questions from patent counsel. It all takes time. So if you're just adding that to the stack of the things that people have to do, there's that hidden cost. Another hard cost is patent counsel. Figuring out how to work with them. They're not cheap. And you're going to be surprised, but all of a sudden you get a legal bill and another legal bill and another legal bill. So patent costs and legal costs could be, very surprising. So getting a handle on that is really important. Also, filing fees with the patent office. If you're going to file, for certain cases, there's a certain charge actually for the number of claims. There could be charges for the number of pages in the patent. I mean, there's just a lot of fees that you might not be aware of. Maintenance fees, 3, 7, 11 years in the US, for instance. You decide you want to continue a patent with another patent, and there's fees there. There's fees everywhere. So not understanding that hard cost could really be a surprise. Many times we find that companies get excited about IP, get involved, they file their first 2 or 3, and they really wish they had some money left to file other ones that they were thinking about as part of their strategy. So many times understanding those fees up front are really important. And there are many other hard costs to this, in terms of like if a patent has an office action to get it through the patent office, and maybe you have 2, 3, 4 office actions. Each office action is going to cost money. So boy, there's a lot of hard costs and also a lot of opportunity loss. So it's something to think about as you get in your journey, which is why I put this podcast together, strategies for reducing the costs and also monetizing the value, which we want to start turning to. So coming up, we're actually going to cover key strategies for saving costs in IP, including the importance of IP extraction, using provisional filings, seeking bulk rates with patent counsel, a lot of things like that. And we'll also cover some research tips, documentation strategies, and the benefits of using international patent filings, and how to do that in a delayed way. So stay tuned. So let's talk about topic number 3, strategies for saving costs. And basically, there's quite a few here. And this is certainly not all encompassing, but one strategy for saving costs on IP is to have some sort of formal extraction process of all your inventions before you file the first one. Because so many times, what I found a lot is that people file the patents they're excited about, but without extracting all the ideas around it in the company. Basically, there's far more important filings somewhere else than the ones you get excited about. And we cover this off in episode number 29, what is an IP scan? So if you're interested in that, please take a look at episode 29 in the Invent Anything library. A second strategy to save costs is IP valuation to determine if you should even file the patent. Now, this is a little bit advanced thinking. And we do IP valuations in my firm, IP Cap, all the time, a couple, 2 or 3 a month. And I started to realize over the years that, boy, you should develop your IP valuation first, assuming you're going to get the patents and figure out how much money they're actually worth before you decide to file the patents. If you did that exercise, that'd be really cool. Like, it's kind of like saying, if I buy the car, I know its trade-in value, right? Just buying a car because you like it is one thing. But if you knew when you bought it, I just bought a boat, and actually a second boat, and I found out, how much I could sell it for by buying it, how much I could sell it for. And it added to the consideration for, buying things. Another way to save costs as a strategy is the trade secret process installation is really important, because sometimes trade secrets are really important to protect yourself. And sometimes trade secrets could be more beneficial than patents in your company. And they're certainly much, much cheaper to get than patents. So you can learn about, trade secrets in episode 11. And I want to mention, almost forgot, that for patent valuation, you could listen to episode 18. Talks all about that. Another way to save costs is using provisionals. And without going deeply into provisionals, you can file a provisional pretty cheaply. As a small entity, it's about $100, $150. And, with patent counsel costs or whatever, pretty minimal if you wrote the provisional yourself. And then you have up to a year to file a patent, but you can now claim your patent pending and all the rest. So provisional is a great way to save money. And sometimes if you have a bunch of inventions, the strategy is, file 10 provisionals, but maybe, fast file, one as a patent to see what the examiners will say, so you can learn quickly. And provisionals are covered off on how to write them and enable them in episode 25 of the podcast series. Another thing is that the idea of using provisionals is very useful, but there's all sorts of strategies for using provisionals. I mentioned, you could file a number of provisionals, but just take one and forward it as a patent to start with. Provisionals work quite well with investors. If you could file provisionals, let the next level of the investment pay for the patents, that's a real winning strategy, because you do have ownership of the inventions when you file the provisional, and you can tout it with the investors, but tell the investors their money is going to be used to file it with the patent office to get a real patent application. Another thing I found, I just did this with a company we work with, is that they ran out of money between raises and their provisionals came up. So we decided that there is a little bit of risk, but we refiled all the provisionals, the exact same provisionals, to get a new date. I call that the rolling provisional. It's a neat strategy because it says, as long as we will take the risk that, this new provisional date is still going to be novel. And generally, if you got a number of provisional filings, that's going to be the case. It's very unlikely that the prior art is going to capture, in the last year, all 10 of your inventions. So this rolling provisional is a great strategy for saving costs. There are a lot of strategies for dealing with patent counsels. One I couldn't tell you enough of, which is just don't pick the first one, interview a few and get a sense of their costs because there could be wild differences between, say, what a patent counsel charges in one city versus another patent counsel in another city, et cetera. And you can deal with having patent counsel really remotely in any state in the United States, if in the US, et cetera. So really shopping around, just like you would any other professional. Another thing is that I found if you think you're going to have three, four, five, six, 10 filings, I'd be dealing with patent counsel, tell them that, and then say and expect some sort of bulk rate, if you will, some sort of fixed fee per case or something. Because the way patent attorneys work, they have to spend time a lot in the first one or two cases to learn about the technology. And then after that, it becomes a little bit easier and they become more cost effective. So you can work with them because they're patent counsel are honest people. They're running businesses, then they'll work with you. So think about it that way. Another thing to save costs is to have a patent strategy where you're patenting some of the stuff and trade secreting part of it. So you don't have to file patents on everything. This is important because sometimes it's even a better strategy to patent part of your inventions and trade secret another aspect because you can stop others from using or selling with your patents, but you can also hide some technology and not teach everybody. Another strategy is, and I've used this quite a bit, is the result of filing patents is to get the patent issued, right? So you stand a much better chance getting the patent issued by going for narrower claims. So when you hear the idea of let's go for broader claims, that's always in context of trying to claim as much territory for the same cost. However, that's usually riddled with problems getting the patent issued, and then you have to come back and narrow it anyway. So I would go for a narrower claim, get the patent through, and then come back and try to broaden it with a continuation. So that's a really good strategy. And another strategy is to save costs is having a patent strategy with narrow claims first. I think when you work with attorneys, rightfully so, they're trying to claim the most territory as they can for the same cost, getting broad claims first. And having lived so many years doing this, I found out that through office actions, you're not going to get the broadest claims. You're going to have to narrow them, and we expect that. So if you start with narrower claims, you're more apt to get the patent through first. And then you can always broaden them with continuations later. So the strategy I've had, which I tell our clients is, why don't we try to make sure we get the patent through first with a narrow claim and then come back and get a broader continuation. So it's something to think about. As long as a narrow claim covers what your product's going to be, more specifically, that's fine. So let's move to topic number 4, which is really more strategies to save costs on IP. So another strategy to save costs is to engage a firm to do a fairly good prior art search on the patent that you're going to file, because usually prior art searches are 1/10 of the cost of filing the patent with a patent write-up. And you'll get a real understanding of what the prior art is to see what your chances are to get it through the patent office. So it's like a risk mitigation technique to do a good prior art search. I know that some attorneys have a strategy, fair as it is, let's let the examiner figure out the prior art to figure out what the claims are going to be. But all in all, in my experience, it's really better to kind of do a prior art search first. Another strategy for reducing cost is, in today's world, I would not go filing this very large case, called an omnibus filing, meaning a case that's hundreds of pages, with the idea that later on, you're going to have all sorts of continuations. Because these omnibus filings, first of all, become one family. And if you ever try to monetize or sell these things, you could have 20 patents on the same omnibus filing, and you're going to get one check for all of them and about the same. But if you had 10 different separate filings, if you could bifurcate them into 10 separate patent families, you'll get a check that's 10x bigger. And that's due to some, case law about how you could, litigate a patent, but to bring all the family members in. So what happened 10 or 15 years ago, the value of these patents that were omnibus went down when you're trying to sell them. And the strategy was, in order to beat that, was to just have separate patent families. So don't file these large omnibus filings. Uh, Also, by the way, when you're filing patents, there may be a charge per fee per page even. And then when you're doing it, trying to transcribe them, that's where the real costs are in the per page, transcriptions or writing it in another language. Another strategy to save cost may seem exactly counter to what I just said, but it's writing up a master disclosure. When you're writing up 8 or 9 to 10 inventions, it's really good to think about the whole system and that you might want to write up a whole bunch of subject matter on the whole value chain of your technology and put that in every single filing. It may be 10 or 15 pages, but it's very useful to put it in every single provisional patent because it makes your continuation strategy better. You can get lots more continuations. So this idea of a master disclosure will really help save a lot of money, particularly in getting office actions through the patent office. So another simple strategy for saving money is in the documentation side. I would vote for getting some expert help to help enable the invention. Sort of not rolling your own, writing your own disclosure, because I've seen so many starts and stops and the cost goes up because people have to rewrite it. So you might want to get expert help to write up that first good disclosure. We cover off in episode 6 how to enable an invention. So you might want to take a look at that. Another strategy for saving costs is when you're following your first patent that you might think is really, the key one, you might decide to do an invent around session, taking the claim and inventing around it and thinking about how others can invent around it, because you can use that information and put it back in the first filing. And I talk about event around in episode 28, so take a look at that. Might be a very valuable thing to do. Certainly saves money rather than refiling more and more and more inventions. Another strategy for reducing cost is accelerated examination. So if you're filing multiple patents, it might be best to file them all as provisionals, except as the first one, because in that one, if you could pay an acceleration fee, really 6 to 9 months, you're getting feedback from the patent office of what they think they'll allow. And once you know that, then you can determine whether you want to file your other patents, provisionals to patents. It's a great way to save money and to do things as fast as possible. Another strategy is when you're filing patents, if you go to multiple countries, you might decide to file what's called a PCT, which is a patent cooperation treaty. And these filings allow you to delay the expense of international filings for up to 30 months. And that gives you time to determine what jurisdictions you want to file in. So filing PCTs is very useful if you're doing a foreign filing strategy. Another strategy to save costs is building some sort of calculation for office actions, maintenance fees. And even today, with a client, I asked the client and the attorney I asked the attorney to kind of size the cost by quarter for the next couple of years. So it's good to have that as an indicator of what are things going to cost. And finally, the other ways to save money is when you release products, make sure that the product reads on the claims that you had versus making the product different than the claims you just filed, because you won't have to refile. And in episode number 12, we can learn about using enabled publications, which are far cheaper as a way to improve coverage of your intellectual property around your base patents. So take a look at enabled publications as a way of producing your own prior art. And coming up, we're going to talk about how to maximize the value of your IP by aligning patents with your business goals, targeting non-core markets for licensing, blocking competitors through strategic filings. And we're also going to discuss justifying your IP investments by calculating the cost versus revenue impact, protecting against copycats, and developing sort of a robust way of looking at it. See you in a minute. So let's talk about topic number 5, strategies for maximizing value with your IP. So the first thing, sort of common sense, but it goes back to something I talked about earlier, was that aligning your IP direction and efforts with your business goals is very important. I would call that an IP strategy. Sort of thinking about the business, the market, the product, the technology, the inventions, the IP, and how that aligns together. And so developing an IP strategy which sometimes is not that difficult to do, is very important before you embark on developing IP. So getting expert help with that is really important. Another strategy to maximize value is understanding the strategies for IP valuation. I mentioned earlier there's an episode of valuation you might take a look at in our podcast series. But if you knew how to value IP, you might understand its value and then understand how to change its value by moving your IP into some other markets, changing your IP more customer driven, changing your IP more vendor driven, partner driven, changing your IP based upon what an acquirer might do. So there's a lot of things that strategically you might want to change about your patent filings or trade secrets to try to enhance its value. Another thing you might want to think about for enhancing the value is writing up patents and making sure that you have claims in non-core markets. Because ultimately, your patents are going to cover, what you want it to cover, protecting your products to stop others from making, using, and selling. But wouldn't it be neat that you had the opportunity while you were doing that for the same patents to be able to license them in non-core? I feel like I should almost do a podcast on this, and maybe I will. But the idea of how do you take any patent and have claims in a market, but then modify it to have claims in other non-core markets, and then use that as a way of separately developing a monetization stream. It's done all the time. It can be done, and maybe I'm just advising you to sort of think about that and to ask the people that you're working with if that's possible. Another thing you can do to maximize the value is writing your patent claims in the direction of the customer. In other words, whatever you do provides a function, and that function may be actually done by your customer. You could develop the apparatus, and then somebody else could be using that apparatus in their method of manufacturing. So thinking about the strategy of having not only your patents, but having patents in your customer space, functional inventions, if you will, functional claims, could really give you a strong value in your IP filings. Another thing is to do the opposite, which is to write patents to block your vendors or your suppliers. I call these value chain patents. In the courses that I've taught over the years, I talk about, supposing you were to make a pencil that had black and red lead, black on one side, red on the other. And so you write with the black and then you turn it around writing with the red to use it as red. And maybe have an eraser that goes on either one that allows you to sort of store it. But then the supplier of your red lead, and the lead itself and the pencil, they may have a process of extrusion where they could connect red to black. And so they're delivering that to you. So if you want to design a red lead and black lead pencil, your supplier may invent the way to create that lead. Shouldn't you get the patent on that? Versus just ordering lead, who cares how they do it for red and black? So thinking about the value chain of patents is really important, and writing those patents up so that innovating in your supply chain, value chain, is important. Another thing is you might want to think about writing your patents on top of an acquirer. In other words, sort of thinking about what company would acquire us and looking at their IP and saying, how do I take my IP and modify it relative to the way an acquirer might think? So, for instance, if you had an apparatus that did a certain thing, your acquirer may see that as a valuable component in the thing that they're building. So now you could write a patent on your apparatus working inside of a larger component system. Another thing you might consider is to maximize the value is monitoring the evidence of use. Now, in episode 15, we've covered off, what is evidence of use and how to do it. You should take a look at that. Because if you got patents, the question you should ask is, am I really stopping others from using or selling? I mean, that was the whole purpose of it, right? So what process do you have to monitor people using your patents? So you should take a look at that and learn about evidence of use, because it's like getting the insurance and then checking out if you need it. So supposing you had flood insurance. I had a place in Florida. It became almost impossible to get really good flood insurance. I think it's even harder now. But what if all of a sudden something changed whereby, you're in an area of the country where maybe you don't have flood insurance, but because of some changes in the topography or the rise of the oceans, you might need flood insurance. So, and the opposite occur, Maybe you have multiple insurances, but one insurance covers what another insurance was trying to cover as well. So you have multiple coverage. So the idea is, how could you figure out, right, what it is that you actually own as a patent and whether or not somebody is violating it? It sort of makes sense that you would do that. It makes sense that when you're trying to get multiple coverages, that maybe you see if you already have coverage in one of the vehicles that you didn't have in another. So you're using kind of like this kind of thinking. Another thing is, and this should really be done, it's pretty easy to do, is to monetize, in monetizing and looking at the value of your patents, follow how many citations your patents are getting. So it turns out when you file a patent, the examiner might provide some references that they want to cite, forcing you to do that in your patent. Let's say 2 years from now, Samsung has cited your patent 35 times. That would be really good for you to know, because maybe all of a sudden Samsung's new IP is being written and your patent has become essential as a prior art component to that. And finally, another strategy to maximize value is you can sort of understand where in your business can IP help. There's an episode 34 and 35 where we talk about how to revitalize your business utilizing IP. Did you know that IP could help in contractual discussions? IP could help in marketing your product. IP can help in you doing a joint venture. IP can help in basically include pricing and the value of your IP in the next raise. I mean, there's so many places that IP can help. So check out episode 34 and 35, Revitalizing Your Business, Utilizing IP. Now let's go to the last topic, which is consideration for justification for the IP work. You try to say, I'm doing some IP work. How could I really justify it? Even though I've talked about ways to save, I talked about the hard costs, I talked about the opportunity cost or loss. Let's take a look at some of the justifications. One is that when you have patents, for instance, it could be a revenue generator. And companies often overlook that you could do licensing. So it's really important to kind of understand that. So you can calculate the cost, but also you can calculate the revenue. Or sort of use the rule of thumb of 35% of my sales margin could be included because I have patents. So another justification for IP work is protection against copycats. So if you have a good patent portfolio, very likely you're going to stop some companies from copying you. So that's a great justification for IP, right? Because if they stop copying you, then you start to own the market or be able to charge more for your product versus somebody else's because you own the patents, which was the reason for the patent system to begin with, to give the inventor their due, to give them some benefit for inventing. Another thing is to sort of think about to justify your IP is all the different monetization opportunities for licensing, for doing transactional deals, or a generator of new revenues. Another justification for IP work could be brand. When you file IP, you're considered the innovator. And, the examiners are independent of your company. So if they allow your patent to issue, then you have the ability to claim that you're the inventor. And why not use that in your brand? Another thing I found as justification for IP work is that the CFO and the CEO can now have an awareness that they own IP, and they can then use that for educating their executive team about the value of the company. And also they can now justify this intangible benefit is now being tangible through IP and be able to use it, with their boards and with their investors. Another justification for IP work is, there's all sorts of IP that we've talked about, patents and trade secrets, but there's enabled publications, there's copyrights, and all sorts of IP vehicles. So there's a broad use of using many different types of IP to get further value and justification. One of the great ways of looking at IP is the risk that you're avoiding through loss of sales if you have a copycat. That's huge. Having a copycat or a competitor, that's huge in your business. So justifying IP work based on that alone should be just prudent for any business. Another justification for IP is to sort of think about creating your own calculator of the cost versus the returns and sort of sizing that financially. I mean, all sorts of companies size financially all the time. Their, revenues over month, by quarter, by year, and their costs, and they try to size all this. It wouldn't take much to develop your own company value calculator for IP. Another thing is that you can use provisionals as a justification for your IP work, testing the market. File the provisionals and see if the market moves towards your provisionals. If they do, file it. If they don't, then don't. So it's a great way to save costs and justify the IP work. And lastly, there's justification for IP work through having the ability to counter assert. Let's face it, if you have your own patents covering your product and maybe some extensions thereof, and somebody sues you for patent infringement, it's very likely that your patents could be used for counter assertion. As a matter of fact, when anybody's going to sue you for patent infringement, they're very likely to look up whether you have patents or not. And if you have patents, they're going to study those. So maybe you haven't been sued because you're the company that has patents protecting your products that overlap onto their products. So having patents is a great way to put a sign out there for those that might want to sue you that you have the ability to fight back with patents. Because if you can't fight back with patents, you have very little to fight back with. So sort of something to think about. Okay, so let's wrap up. In topic number one, we talked about what I found. And here I talk about the many startups that I've worked with and how, I've understood that they misunderstand the true cost of IP and the opportunity loss. I talked about the fact that they're not adept at sort of monetizing. They don't understand, the difference between a good claim and how to monetize that. They don't understand a lot of the experience of a clear IP strategy. So there's just a lot of knowledge there, which was the driver for this podcast, quite honestly. So a lot of things I found there. Topic number two, I talked about the opportunity costs and the hard costs. There's lots of opportunity loss here, lost sales margins, trade secret loss, reduced M&A multiples, but there are also some hard costs, right? Executive time, patent development time, legal counsel, maintenance fees, and all the rest. So when you put it together, there's a lot of opportunity loss, but also there's a financial cost, and it's really important these hard costs be figured out in advance. In topic number three, I talked about some strategies to save costs. We discussed things like including processes for extraction, valuation. We talked about these for provisionals to test the market. We talked about implementing trade secrets. We talked about the additional cost approaches for fixed fees with patent counsels, balancing trade secrets, and all the rest. So there's a lot of different tips there. In topic number four, we did the same thing and continued it. There was a lot of tips and strategies for saving costs. So things like doing a prior art search or avoiding the large omnibus filing or figuring out ROI, utilizing expert help, or things like inventing around claims or using accelerated examination, leveraging the PCT if you're doing foreign filings, and thinking about filing fee expenses and long-term strategies that focus on things like enabled publications versus patents for prior art and stuff like that. In topic number five, we talked about strategies for maximizing value. And here we discussed things like aligning IP better with your business goals, but enhancing IP valuation, understanding it first. We talked about how to write your patents in non-core markets for licensing revenue. Additionally, we talked about writing patents that cater to customers, can block competitors. We talked about vendor and supply chain claims, etc., all as a way to enhance the maximizing the value. And we even talked about how it can play a central role for driving market positioning. Finally, topic number six, we talked about the considerations for IP work, and it's a broad range of things here. We talked about things like maximizing the value by enhancing the valuation, by getting into non-core markets, writing up patents that cater to customers and block competitors, and how to use that to drive business expense. So, boy, there's just a lot of justification for IP work. So to kind of sum it up and sort of thinking about the strategies to give you is sort of maximum value at lowest costs, these six topics we covered. I think the last point was, getting into IP, if maybe even your first time or maybe just you don't have that much experience, it's really important for those in charge to think about the costs and the risks of not doing it, that balance. In general, I found that it seems like always getting intellectual property patents is available to almost every company, and they should participate in it. Almost every company. It's like almost every company needs a CEO. Almost every company needs some round of financing. Almost every company needs to file the right paperwork with the states and the governments. Almost every company, right, needs to file taxes, etc. And I would say almost every company needs IP help of one way or the other. Because if you sort of think about it, your company was designed to offer something, product or sales or services to your clients, to your customers. So you must have something unique. So, and remember, if you like this, please subscribe and come join our blog on Invent Anything and listen to our new series of Inventors at Work. Thank you very much. This is John Cronin, Invent Anything.